Revelation 18:11-13 lists the many items you can get from this city. They say you can get whatever you want in New York. Look at the last two items in this list, which are slaves or the bodies and souls of men. This verse is amazingly accurate. The United States was allowed to become the world's biggest debtor nation when it became bankrupt in 1933, eventually along with all other nations, because your birth certificate is a bond. You are pledged as collateral on the debt of your nation. You are traded as a human resource on the stock exchanges of the world, especially in New York, the home to the world's largest stock exchange.
Baby comes out, do they give him to the mother? You give the baby to the nurse. What does she do with it? She runs to the other side of the wall, doesn't she? Baby disappears. What did you do? You gave the rest to that person, whoever it was, you don't know. Now what do? They come right around and they bring it back to you. And what are they giving you? Remember this one? They're giving you possession, but they're giving it to you. Possession, title, or excuse me, possession, use, time, age 18 or whatever. But what happened over here? You gave them this.
Interest.
That's what they own. They own you. They stand you on the contract, so you understood the contract, didn't you? Footprints.
Corporate personhood is a real scandal. Corporate personhood is an interesting doctrine. I mean, it goes back to the 14th Amendment, which is very, I'm sorry to bring up too much history, but this stuff is really enlightening. You go back to the 14th Amendment right after the Civil War. Its core principle is that no person can be deprived of rights without due process of law. Actually, there's something like that in the Fifth Amendment, but this expanded it. And the intention, of course, was freed slaves. If freed slaves cannot be deprived of their rights. Well, it was never applied to freed slaves. Almost entirely it was applied to corporations. What it means is that the meaning of the 14th Amendment was expanded so that person included corporations.
You will note that the 13th Amendment provides that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. But why the emphasis on involuntary servitude? Isn't it the same thing as slavery? Sure it is. But they had to mention the concept of involuntary servitude because they wished to retain another type of slavery, voluntary servitude. When the slaves were released from their involuntary servitude following the war, their status was changed from that of being property to that of being a person. That is, first, subject to the jurisdiction of the laws of the United States, however, limits access to parts of the Bill of Rights. But first remember, anyone who voluntarily subjects himself to the laws or jurisdiction of another is, in every way, obligated to abide by the terms of any contracts or laws established by whomever establishes the rules of the contract.
You were given specific orders. Hey, I'm just doing my job. You give me that jurisdiction crap. The orders were for your protection.
But what does the Matrix tell us? The Matrix tells us that the world is an illusion. Your purpose is a source of energy. For an automated system, you are less than a slave. Sound familiar to the real world?
God created people. We the people got together 200 years ago and created a state government. All of those states got together and created a federal government. And the federal government is supposed to be the servant to the state government. States are supposed to be supreme, states' rights, which goes into a long story of the wrong side winning the Civil War, right?
Exactly. What was the Civil War?
What was the Civil War? It's Abe Lincoln's war. It wasn't the Civil War.
That's right. It wasn't slavery.
It wasn't slavery, no. And then the federal government created a corporate federal government. Notice it's all capital letters. The corporate federal government created a corporate state government. And one of these two, somewhere in here, created persons with all capital letters. This would be Kent Hovind with all capital letters. This is not me. Which leaves us with an interesting situation. Since whatever God creates, He controls, and we're supposed to be subservient to God, Whatever we create, we control, and the states, the federal and state government are supposed to be subservient to we the people. They're supposed to be our servants. But whatever the government creates, it controls. So the government has created persons, actually a corporate soul, for every individual being in the United States.
So what have we done here? We brought ourselves under the law that they've written. We've understood the law. We used to be at the top of the pyramid with Yahweh up here, we the people, Constitution, government down here, and all their little babies. But if you come out from down here and understand them, this is where you are. And you do it by contract. Everything's by contract. So we made ourselves basically unrighteous by contracting with it. We're our own Adams, aren't we? Adam had the same deal handed to him. Who told you you were naked? Who told you you were legal fiction? Who told you you were a straw man? Fiction. Who told you you belong in this court?
Satan.
They did. You're a taxpayer. Who told you that? Who told you you were naked? He gave you the power to be sovereign. We've come under here in contract. Everybody commits the sin of Adam and Eve on a daily basis.
Kent Hovind, also known as Dr. Dino, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for tax evasion in 2007. His wife, Jo, sentenced to just over a year for the same charges. The evangelist couple operated Dinosaur Adventureland, a former Pensacola theme park dedicated to creationism. Hovind had maintained that park employees were missionaries and not subject to taxation. As part of their conviction, the Hovinds were ordered to forfeit 10 properties, including the theme park. Today, the Commission will accept information from the order concerning the forfeiture of properties and assets previously owned by the Hovinds.
He's been convicted. If you don't know, he was convicted 8 years ago for not paying his taxes with his ministry, which he should have paid. Anyway, went to trial and he got convicted. I believe he got 10 years, and he's currently scheduled to be released in 2015. He still believes he did nothing wrong. He still fails to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and he's unrepentant. He really hasn't learned his lesson whatsoever. All that time in prison, Kent, and you still haven't learned your lesson. He still says he hasn't broken any laws. You've been convicted, Kent. You have broken laws. You will have a criminal record, and you'll have that for the rest of your life. You might as well get used to it. I've never been an anti-tax protester, he told WorldNet Daily. I have always said that everyone should obey the law, including the government. I have always paid every tax I owe. No, you haven't, Kent. You moron.
Karl Marx said we need a heavy progressive income tax. Did you know that was Karl Marx's idea? And did you know in America it is voluntary? And 59 million Americans don't volunteer. So what they did in 1929, they manufactured a depression. A couple of years later, everybody's starving, and they said, wow, what are we going to do? And Roosevelt comes in and says, well, I got a deal for you. Come down and get your Social Security number. Huh? People lined up to get it. By the way, that is totally voluntary. And if you have a Social Security number, you have just entered into a trust. You're part of a trust agreement, and you've got a whole bunch of things you've got to do now.
As I mentioned on the first session, words are spirit. Joshua said, my words are spirit, my words are truth. Another place he said, my words are life. Notice he didn't say my words are good. That's part of the knowledge of, that's a tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's this whole world system. He said, my words are life. Okay? So that's outside. That's for living souls, sovereigns created in the image and the likeness of their creator. So he really saved Moses' butt. He saved his rear end big time. Because he had been convicted in the world system, Egypt, for killing that Egyptian, and he had been exiled. So now he's being told to go back and let my people go to the ruler. He goes back, and what's the ruler going to say? What's your name? And what's he going to say? What is not my name? I'll say that again. What's your name? No, what is not my name? No, Moshe didn't do that, all right? Moshe went back and said, as he was told to say, I am that I am, I will be that I will be. So he didn't contract, all right? So we get into words, and we begin to understand that we go by a name, but we are not the name. A name is a noun, a noun is a thing.
You are tuned in to God's Property Radio. Here are your hosts, Sam and Dan.
I go by Sam.
And I go by Dan. And welcome back to God's Property Radio, Episode 8.
That's right. Episode 8, Placing the Burden of Proof with Paul J. Hansen.
Yes. For a lot of you out there, this is a subject matter that very few people cover. It's something that Sam and I have looked into and done our very best to research this last year as we've come to learn things about the world and the New World Order. And it's very hard to find verifiable proof and information. But I don't know, Sam, what do you think? This was pretty good.
Yeah, again, going back to our first episode that we did with Leonard Ulrich, we talked briefly about the line from his film where he mentions the birth certificate. And if you're listening to us right now, then you've heard our intro music, I assume, which I apologize. The Lord said that he would never flood the earth again. And I know that I've done quite a whammy here with a 10-minute intro. So I'm going to try to promise not to flood the listeners again with a 10-minute intro. But this is, again, like Daniel said, it's a very complex topic. I don't think that you can just explain it in 2 minutes. I mean, maybe you could, but I sure can't. So I tried to take from a lot of different people that have researched the topic. Not all of them are right, and I know that. But I think I took what was right from each of them.
Yeah, I would say that for you guys, for that 10-minute intro, that is very concisely, in a very not packed way, packing up what Sam and I have learned in the last year in a simple explanation way. Like, you really couldn't do it any shorter than that.
So bottom line, contract law and jurisdiction. That's what we talk about with Paul J. Hansen. Now,
and territorial law.
Well, territorial jurisdiction.
Oh, correct.
So, yeah, if you have researched, the straw man or your legal fiction, then this might be an episode that you'd really enjoy. If you haven't heard anything about it, you should definitely check this episode out. Let's just talk about Paul J. Hansen.
Okay.
Who is Paul J. Hansen, and how did we get in touch with him? Because I'm going to go ahead and place the burden of proof on Daniel here.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we're going to need to go back a little bit, guys. As you know, the two people we quote most frequently on the show tend to be Leonard Ulrich and Dr. Kent Hovind. So if you haven't looked Dr. Kent Hovind up yet or know who that is, let me give you a brief explanation of that, and then we'll get into how I got into contact with Paul J. Hansen. All right, so Kent Hovind is a creationist scientist. His doctorate is in education, and he stopped teaching, I think it's more than 30 years ago now, and started a ministry known as Creation Science Evangelism, where he started a creation museum in his home in Pensacola, Florida. Eventually he ended up building a theme park called Dinosaur Adventureland. Never got to go. I feel bad, but I wish I did, maybe someday. He started this ministry and started going around debating evolutionists in schools. You can look his debates up on YouTube. He is excellent. In my opinion, when it comes to the topic of creation, there is no better debater or defender of this topic than Kent Hovind. And that is not to put down the work of any other creationists out there, like the Creation Museum out in Kentucky there. Dr. Ken Ham, he does excellent work. I'm just saying, when it comes to debating, I think Dr. Hovind definitely has it. So what happened with Dr. Hovind, though, is you can look up his college courses on how to teach his seminars on YouTube, and in one of them he explains how, I think I've even quoted him this before, we want very badly to be right with God, and that is Kent Hovind's heart. And in researching how things worked, he came to the knowledge and the understanding that, and this may come as a shock to some of you, so just hear us out and listen to the episode, but the income system here is voluntary in the U.S. The taxable income system is voluntary. And a Social Security card is voluntary. A birth certificate is voluntary.
A driver's license.
Any type of licensing certificate, it is voluntary. You do not have to do it. No one knows that. So Dr. Hovind took some time and he studied it and got in touch with some people. One of those happened to be Paul J. Hansen. And he learned that you don't have to pay taxes on your income, actually, and you can listen to his college course on it. He goes into quite a bit of detail talking about He'd read both the tax code and the tax law, which, by the way, is statutory law, I believe.